I find it's always so interesting to explore these because sometimes we have a pretty good idea of what's going on. And then other times it's like, I hadn't really realized that I was talking to myself that way, or that I was feeling that in my body, or that, my associations with friends are so impacted by this, whatever that might be. So I thought we could start with just a general look around the room, notice the safety of the location that you're in. A few breaths. And as you're doing that, just notice, is there anything alarming that you need to take care of right away? If you were hearing some sounds that were alarming, you would automatically go and take care of that. So, this practice is really just to let our nervous system pay attention for a moment to the safety that we experience here. We notice that we're here. We might notice, oh, I was kind of holding my breath a bit, or maybe my breath is a little bit shallow. But when I really tune in, I could relax my shoulders, take a few deeper breaths. I use cyclic sighing a lot as a grounding practice because it's so effective. Some of you are familiar with that, I'm sure. It's a deep double inhale through the nose and then a long, slow exhale, like you're breathing out through your mouth through a thin straw. Why don't we do that 4 or 5 times on your own pace? Deep double inhale. Breathing out like you're breathing out through a thin straw, and let your shoulders relax, let yourself kind of settle. I find when we do that double inhale that it's helpful to relax my shoulders again after. We notice that we're here. One of the things about doing a little practice like that, it's like a minute or something, 4 or 5 breaths, is it really helps us to just kind of settle in a non-linear kind of a way. Like we know that we're here doing this practice and meeting together because we hit a link and we came online and we're doing that. But to really let our body know that whatever I was doing in the past or whatever I'm doing next, I could just kind of settle into this for now. So our topic today is showing up for ourselves. And one of the things I would say about that at the very beginning is that the reason that we don't show up for ourselves often is because of trauma. So the effect of trauma is that we tend to disconnect from ourselves. And we tend to go into the head more than into our body or into our heart. So we think about things, we think about how we feel, we might ruminate over things that happened in the past or really kind of anxiously project into the future, catastrophic thinking. We have a lot going on in the mind that prevents us from showing up for ourselves. And part of the healing of that is to practice being here. But also, it's to notice, like right now, you could be doing 100 other things, and right now you're doing this. So we could give ourselves some appreciation for that. I'm really interested in changing my relationship with myself, in deepening my kindness and compassion and connection. So one of the things that helps is to actually come and do some, connecting, breathe and things, but also to acknowledge and to understand that the reason that we're disconnected from ourselves in the first place isn't because we're boring or we don't like ourselves or something. It's because of trauma. We've disconnected because of trauma. So when we think about who we like to be interacting with, we're thinking about people who like us, people who find us interesting. And it's so fascinating that we don't really, I mean, on an intellectual level, we can understand why some people aren't connecting with us, that's for sure. But what we interpret it is, if they're not connecting with me, maybe there's something wrong with me. And then, a lot of the experiences that we've had as a child as well. We have the inner critic. We have that feeling of core deficiency beliefs of If my parents aren't paying attention to me, if they're not helping me, if they're not interested, or if they're harming me, then there's something wrong with me. So even though we might be working a lot with that and have, in different ways we can heal some of those beliefs because they're not true. The reason that people don't interact with us rarely has much to do with us. It's often to do with something that's going on with them. But even if we run into somebody who doesn't particularly enjoy us, they're not interested in us, um, that doesn't mean that we're boring. It just means that maybe we need to spread our net a little bit more and find some people who are interested in us, who we have that vibe with. Sometimes people have a memory of that from childhood. And some people have adult best friends that are like that. It's like something happens, it's like, oh, I can hardly wait to tell that person about that. So when we think about that, why is it that we feel that sense of anticipation? Part of it is that we trust the person. We trust the person that they're going to be interested in us. And even if it's a bad time for them, we might have to wait a little bit, but we're engaged in a way that's reliable. So part of why I bring that up is because we can also offer ourselves some of that. So we might not be reliably present with ourselves. None of us are 24/7. I'm not anyway, assuming that that's pretty standard. However, we could be more often engaged with ourselves. One thing that I found over 3 decades now of meditating and yoga and somatic inquiry now this last decade is that I really don't have a lot of unresolved sensations and energy in my body. When something comes up, I pretty much know what it's about. And I'm interested in going in and just kind of hanging out there for a bit. I don't judge myself or shame myself for that anymore. And that's part of, we need to take away some of those habits of shaming ourselves and then engage with ourselves with interest, with kindness, with compassion. So I thought we could do a little bit of an inquiry. Come back into regulation right now. Notice what's swirling in your brain after what I was just talking about there. Maybe you were thinking of a certain person who's a friend, or maybe you're feeling kind of isolated and lonely. And maybe that person was a long time ago and they're not in your life anymore for lots of different reasons. Or maybe you've just never had that really, that you've been protecting yourself enough and you haven't had people around you that you were able to really attune with like that. So if you were to be the best friend you can imagine, and you could imagine yourself sitting across from them or beside them, and this could be someone that you know now, this could be someone who is a good friend now, or someone that you might visualize or imagine. Could be your adult self to your younger self. That's also so helpful. So, whatever your experience is right now, see what would happen if you were to unconditionally show up for yourself right now in this moment. And we notice it in the thoughts. There might be thoughts in our mind about that. Probably there are. What does it feel like in your body? A few minutes ago, we were checking in with the environment around us. It's always an option as well. Just to look around for a moment, get yourself kind of settled again. You might take a couple of those deeper breaths, let it out in a sigh, let your shoulders relax, let your chest soften. I'm here for myself right now, in this moment. And then notice what thoughts come in around that or what happens in your body. It's interesting to let ourselves have some time with this. Probably what's happening for some people is there's some kind of tension in the body that we could work on our physical level for sure. There might be some rebuttal in the thoughts in the mind. Well, that's actually not very true. I would like to show up for myself more with kindness, but I don't tend to do that. I tend to be kind of in a fog or disconnected. I'm not really present a lot of the time. So notice if that feels true. But not being present or dissociating is a trauma response. It's a habit that forms usually when we're quite young. We can't physically leave situations generally when we're young. So we disconnect. We might be accused of daydreaming all the time or get your nose out of that book, or we have a lot of ways of going somewhere else where it's more interesting, perhaps, but also where it's safer. If you were to bring up a memory of a time from your childhood when you felt like you were disconnected and you weren't very present, what comes up for you around that? What were your circumstances? And did you have adults in your life, parents or other people, who were really interested in getting to know you? Did you have a sense of that? Like when something happened at school, for instance, did you have someone to come home to and say, "This is what happened to me in school, this bully, or this test that I got a good mark on," or whatever that might be? Was that your situation? Let yourself settle with that for a moment. Did you have anyone supporting you when you were a child? Anyone who was interested in you and really engaged, who was kind? Notice what that feels like in your body as you're sitting with that. And then wherever you are on that continuum, yeah, most of the time I could, or no, never. It was never safe for me to go home and talk about what happened. I would just be judged for that or told to stand up to the bullies or whatever that might be. But I never really felt better after I did that. So somewhere in there, something's coming up around that. So see if you could sit with that without judging yourself. What do you normally say to yourself when you think back on those times? Do you have some open heartedness for yourself? And could you bring that in right now? Could you soften right now? Stay with that for a few minutes. Notice your breath. Some of the things we do to manage trauma are very healing and healthy, and other ones aren't as much. So it's also very common to get into, as an adult anyway, but also I suppose with younger people now, there's screens everywhere. But to get into too much TV, too many screens, too many games, and also adults have access to alcohol and other drugs and a lot of different ways to take the edge off to help us feel a little bit better. So we might go walking and do things that are healthy, and we might also go into things that are not as healthy. Certainly, I have done both of those through my life. So if we were to look at that as a way of showing up for ourselves, that might shift kind of how we think about that as well. These are really good strategies for a child, and some of the only ones available to us. So if you think about now, so if we bring ourselves into this moment as well, and keep your higher level self here, your adult self, how do you support yourself now? What are some of the approaches, the strategies that you have now to support yourself? What comes up when you think about that? And there's probably people here who have an inner critic. I used to have a mild inner critic. Not my parents were never critical or judgmental or showing contempt. They weren't showing any interest either. But I didn't have a lot of that patterning and conditioning that a lot of people have. So if you had people who are actively traumatizing you as a child, then often we internalize that voice. I have some of that, but it wasn't ever as intense as I know it has been for some people. But notice what comes up for you around that. Do you have a sense of, I'm generally kind to myself, or is it, my mind is a nightmare? I'm just so critical. Somewhere on that continuum, where do you fit? What is it that you're trying to accomplish by that? It's always trying to keep us safe in some way. It's very ineffective because it shames us, it makes us shut down. So, criticizing, shaming are proven. They've done a lot of studies on this. But we know that too. We know that in our gut. It's not helpful. So, as you're kind of sitting, noticing your breath, noticing your body, where are you at with that? If we look at perfectionism, for instance, it can be very debilitating in terms of it paralyzes us. All shame really shuts us down. So, if we have a history of never being able to perform quite well enough, our parents were always critical no matter how hard we tried, no matter how well we did, no matter how hard we tried. We were never given appreciation. It was always pressure. You could have done better, or yeah, I know you did well this time, but you could have done better. So, if that's the case, have you internalized that? And if you have, is that something that you'd like to work with? So many of these things are helpful until they're not. So, if they're going into extremes, then it's not helpful. It's abusive, actually, the way that some of us pressure ourselves and the way that some of us are pressured by other people, too, of course. So, if we're looking at, I'm supporting myself with more kindness, that doesn't mean I'm supporting myself to be lazy and never get out of bed. Do I need to give myself a little bit of encouragement to get some things done? Am I disconnecting so much and maybe dissociating so much? Am I really hooked on games? Or I've taken all the games off my phone because apparently I can't manage them without them kind of getting out of control after a while. But I am able to take them off my phone. So there's all these things that we're working with. That's one of the ways that I'm supporting good mental health is that I'm not doing subway surf on my phone for 2 hours. It's not on there anymore. So, what is it for you? How are you supporting yourself right now? As we're all wanting more and deeper connection, part of it is we want authentic connection. We want someone to know who we truly are. So, I've found that being present in our own body, noticing, okay, here's that sensation again. It feels like whatever it feels like in your body. It's in my chest, it's heavy, it's dense, it feels kind of threatening. But when I actually go into my body and get to know what are the sensations and energies in my body and what do they mean? So we can do that kind of work as well. We can go in and kind of sit with the sensation. It's like, why is that here? Oftentimes it's something from the past or our nervous system's trying to warn us about something. So that's very common. We all have those. As we get to know ourselves in that way, we might still have a habit of disconnecting when we're out in the world or something. We can put together some time, even if it's a few minutes before bed or when we first wake up without reaching for our phone. We just connect in. It's like, what's going on in my life right now? How do I feel in my body? Am I relaxed? Am I holding my breath? These are all ways that we can get to know ourselves. We can't support ourselves if we don't know ourselves. We can't really say, I love myself if I don't know myself. So, a lot of supporting ourselves means we show up for ourselves. We're interested, we're engaged, and we're the kind of internal friend that we want to have. So, if we tune in and, turn off the distractions for a few minutes and then our mind just starts going, blah, 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 you're not good enough, we're not going to want to be friends with that person. We want to be friends with someone who's kind and who's supportive and who is engaged with us and not shaming us. So, how could we work with that? How could we offer ourselves that? It's not an instant turnaround often, and it's something that we can set our intention around and cultivate. I'm going to pay attention to myself. When I go into that meeting and I'm kind of dreading it, if I know ahead of time, then I might be able to do some regulating practices. Either way, I'm going to be able to come out of that with more presence, more connection with myself. Yeah, that was a tough one. And instead of disconnecting and going into some kind of remedy, instead of going right into that, we could come into our heart. It's like, yeah, that was hard. And I made it through. And I did remember to breathe some of the time. And I stayed kind of regulated. And now I'm here just continuing to pay attention. I notice this was my experience. If the inner critic comes in, I'm going to tell it to back off. I can be here for myself. All of these things that might still be happening in our nervous system, the inner critic, the disconnection, not showing up for ourselves because we're just disengaged, those can all be changed. We can work with all of those. So that's a really good thing to know. Attuned empathy of here I am, I'm good enough, I'm interesting enough to pay attention to myself. And I'm going to start doing that and I'm going to get to know myself more. And I'm going to start really showing up for myself with my attention, with my kindness. This is workable.